My sister stood up at our family dinner, champagne glass raised high, her voice carrying that particular tone of triumph I'd learned to recognize over 34 years. Before we eat, I want to share something incredible. You all know about Dad's trust fund, the one he set up for Maya and me. She paused, savoring the moment. Well, Brad and I just closed on our dream house in Bellevue. 5 bedrooms, waterfront view, the works. We used my portion wisely, invested it perfectly. She gestured to the elaborate spread on the table, catered from that overpriced French restaurant Mom loved. And this celebration dinner? Consider it the first of many smart financial decisions. Her husband Brad grinned, squeezing her shoulder while Mom dabbed at her eyes with pride. I stayed perfectly still, my phone already vibrating in my pocket. The caller ID showed a number I'd been expecting for weeks. Then Brad's phone rang, his face going pale as he answered. What do you mean the IRS is at our accountant's office? His voice cracked with panic. Why are they asking about fraudulent trust distributions? Something they thought they'd gotten away with was about to unravel in spectacular fashion. Before we continue, I want to thank you for being here. If you believe that financial fraud should have consequences, no matter who commits it, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps these important stories reach others. Now, let me explain how I ended up at this table, surrounded by people who'd spent my entire life treating my achievements like footnotes to my sister's existence. Jessica and I had been born 3 years apart, but you'd think it was 3 decades based on how differently we were raised. She was the pretty one, the one who could charm anyone, the one Mom paraded around like a trophy. I was the smart one, which in our family translated to useful but unremarkable. At Jessica's high school graduation, Mom threw a party for 80 people. When I graduated summa cum laude from University of Washington with a computer science degree, we had dinner at Olive Garden. Just the 4 of us. Dad paid. But Mom spent the entire meal talking about Jessica's new boyfriend. The pattern was so consistent I could have written an algorithm for it. When Jessica got engaged to Brad at 25, Mom planned a year-long wedding extravaganza that cost $40,000. When I landed my first job at Microsoft 2 months later, starting at $85,000 a year, Mom's response was, "That's nice, honey. Did you see Jessica's dress alterations? She looks like a princess." The wedding album had 250 photos. My Microsoft badge made it into exactly 0 family photos, despite it representing 5 years of brutal studying and 3 rounds of technical interviews that had left me exhausted and exhilarated. Jessica's life became a carefully curated Instagram feed of domestic perfection. 3 kids in 4 years. Each announcement treated like a royal birth. Her house in the suburbs became Mom's second home, a shrine to grandmotherhood where my sister reigned supreme. My achievements at Microsoft, leading teams, shipping products used by millions, earning promotions that tripled my salary, were met with distracted nods before Mom would pivot to discussing Jessica's latest Pinterest project or her middle child's potty training progress. Dad was different, quieter, more observant. He worked in aerospace engineering for 38 years, retiring at 65 with a pension and careful investments that had grown substantially. During our rare one-on-one lunches, usually when Mom was occupied with Jessica's latest crisis, he would ask me detailed questions about my work. He understood algorithms and data structures in a way Mom never would. "You're building something that matters, Maya," he'd said once, his eyes serious. "Don't let anyone make you forget that." The stroke came suddenly, 3 weeks after his 68th birthday. One moment he was working in his garden, the next he was on the ground, the left side of his body refusing to respond. Jessica arrived at the hospital in full drama mode, sobbing loud enough that nurses came to check on her. I was the one who spoke to the doctors, who understood the medical terminology, who made the calls about life support when it became clear his brain damage was catastrophic. Jessica's tears were real, but so was her complete inability to handle any practical aspect of his death. I arranged the funeral, picked the casket, wrote the obituary, handled the death certificates, coordinated with the crematorium, and managed the reception afterward. Jessica showed up in black designer clothes Mom had bought her, accepting condolences like a bereaved celebrity while I stood in my work clothes, having come straight from the office after finishing the arrangements. At the reception, I overheard Mom telling her book club friends how Jessica was taking it so hard, how sensitive souls feel things more deeply. Nobody mentioned that I'd been the one coordinating everything while my sister practiced her grief face for social media. The will reading happened 2 weeks later in Dad's attorney's office downtown. Lawrence Mitchell had been Dad's lawyer for 20 years, a meticulous man who wore bow ties and kept his office organized with an engineer's precision. Mom, Jessica, Brad, and I sat in leather chairs while Lawrence pulled out the relevant documents. Dad's estate was straightforward. The house went to Mom, along with enough investments to keep her comfortable for life. His pension survivor benefits went to her as well. Then Lawrence cleared his throat. For his daughters, James established a trust fund 5 years ago. The total value is currently $500,000, split equally between Maya Chen and Jessica Morrison. $250,000 each. He adjusted his glasses. The trust was structured with specific distribution terms. Both daughters receive access at age 35, or upon the trustee's determination of financial need, whichever comes first. The designated trustee is Patricia Chen, James's sister. Aunt Patricia had always been closer to Mom than to Dad, despite the blood relation. She'd watched Jessica's kids when Mom couldn't, attended Jessica's elaborate birthday parties, and seemed to share Mom's view that my career was somehow less important than my sister's role as a mother. But Dad had chosen her as trustee, and I'd assumed he had his reasons. The months after Dad's funeral blurred together. I threw myself into work, leading a critical security infrastructure project that required 16-hour days and weekend sprints. My team was building authentication systems for Microsoft's cloud services, protecting millions of users from increasingly sophisticated attacks. The work was consuming, technically challenging, and exactly what I needed to avoid thinking about the fact that the one person who'd truly seen my worth was gone. Jessica's social media, which I rarely checked but Mom constantly referenced, showed her grief journey. Tasteful black and white photos with captions about loss and healing. Quotes about fathers and daughters. Pictures of her kids holding photos of their grandfather. Each post garnered hundreds of sympathetic comments and likes. When I posted a simple "miss you, Dad" with a picture of us at my college graduation, I got 23 likes, mostly from coworkers who knew I'd lost my father. 6 months after Dad's death, my project at Microsoft wrapped successfully. The launch was covered in tech publications, my name listed as lead engineer. The security system we'd built became a model for industry best practices. My director called me into his office to discuss promotion opportunities. "You're on track for principal engineer," he said, explaining that the role came with significant salary increases and stock options that would vest over 4 years. "We're talking about total compensation around $350,000 annually." I called Mom to share the news. Her response, "That's wonderful, honey. Did Jessica tell you they're renovating their kitchen? Italian marble countertops. She has such sophisticated taste." A month later, I received a letter from Aunt Patricia. The envelope was thin, containing a single page on her personal stationery. "Dear Maya," it began formally. "After careful consideration of the trust terms and consultation with the family, I have determined that Jessica has greater immediate financial need than you. As such, I am authorizing early distribution of trust funds to assist with her family expenses. Your portion will be available when you turn 35, as originally specified. This decision is final. Regards, Patricia." I read it 3 times, my coffee getting cold in my hand. My portion would be available at 35. But Jessica was only 37 now, which meant she'd received early distribution. For what financial need? Her husband worked in sales, they lived in a nice suburban house, and Mom was constantly bragging about their lifestyle. Meanwhile, I was 34, still paying off student loans Dad had helped with but hadn't completely covered, renting a 1-bedroom apartment in Seattle because housing prices were astronomical. I called Aunt Patricia. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice careful. "Maya. I got your email. I didn't send an email. I'm calling about the letter." "What financial need?" "Jessica's husband has a job, they own a house. It's not appropriate to discuss another beneficiary's circumstances," she interrupted. "The trust terms give me discretionary authority. I've exercised it. Your father would understand. My father would want to know why one daughter gets her inheritance at 37 while the other has to wait until 35. The line went quiet for a moment. "Your salary at Microsoft is substantial, Maya. Jessica is raising 3 children. The decision has been made." She hung up before I could respond. Something about the conversation felt wrong. Not just unfair, but wrong in a way that triggered the analytical part of my brain that solved complex problems for a living. I pulled out the trust documents Lawrence Mitchell had provided. The language was clear: equal distribution at age 35, or earlier upon trustee's determination of need. Both daughters. Not one daughter. I spent 3 days studying the documents, cross-referencing with trust law resources available online. Washington state required trustees to act in good faith, with loyalty to all beneficiaries. Showing favoritism to one beneficiary while denying another without legitimate cause violated fiduciary duty. But proving financial fraud would require more than suspicion. My security clearance at Microsoft had been upgraded 6 months earlier for the authentication project. The elevated clearance required detailed financial disclosure, including any significant assets or expected inheritances. I'd listed the trust fund, noting it would vest at 35. The background investigation had been thorough, including verification of all financial claims, which meant the federal government had documentation of my beneficial interest in the trust. I requested my tax returns for the past 5 years, comparing them to the trust's annual tax filings that Lawrence Mitchell had provided. Trust funds over a certain size had to file returns, reporting all distributions. The most recent filing showed a single distribution of $250,000 to Jessica Morrison. My name appeared nowhere on the distribution schedule. That's when I found it. Buried in the supporting documents were signature pages, authorization forms signed by both beneficiaries agreeing to the early distribution structure. Jessica's signature was clearly hers. The signature next to my name looked close to mine, but the M in Maya was wrong. Too angular. The descender on the Y didn't curve the way mine did. Someone had forged my signature on documents authorizing Jessica to receive funds that should have been held until we both reached the distribution age. I photographed everything with my phone, uploading the images to encrypted cloud storage. Then I called Lawrence Mitchell's office. His secretary informed me he'd retired 6 months ago, his practice absorbed by a larger firm. The new attorneys handling his former clients had no record of the trust beyond the initial filing. Dad's meticulous lawyer, the one who'd kept perfect records, was gone. Convenient timing. My next call was to a forensic accountant recommended by a colleague. Diana Torres worked primarily on corporate fraud cases, but she agreed to review my documents. We met in her office in Bellevue, her wall covered with certifications and licenses. She studied the trust paperwork for 20 minutes, occasionally making notes, before looking up. "This is textbook beneficial interest fraud," she said bluntly. "The forged signatures, the unequal distribution, the trustee's conflict of interest. It's all here." She tapped the authorization forms. "But proving it requires cooperation from the trustee or beneficiary who received funds, which you won't get, or examination of their tax filings. What would their tax returns show? If Jessica received $250,000 from a trust, she should have reported it as income or inheritance, depending on how it was structured. If she didn't report it, that's tax evasion. If the trustee helped her hide it, that's conspiracy." Diana's expression was serious. But getting access to someone else's tax returns requires either their permission or a federal investigation. The answer came from an unexpected source. My elevated security clearance required periodic renewal, including updated financial disclosures. During my renewal interview with a background investigator named Robert Chen, I mentioned the trust fund situation when he asked about expected inheritances. His expression shifted from routine to interested. "You listed this trust on your previous disclosure," he noted, checking his tablet. "But you're saying you haven't received any distributions despite your sister receiving her full share?" "That's correct. I believe my signature was forged on authorization documents." He made several notes. "Ms. Chen, financial fraud involving forged documents can impact security clearances if it suggests vulnerability to coercion or blackmail. But more importantly, if federal financial disclosure documents have been falsified, that falls under our investigative purview." He looked up. "I'm going to refer this to our financial crimes liaison. They work with the IRS on cases involving fraud connected to cleared individuals." 3 weeks later, I received a call from IRS Special Agent Victoria Walsh. She had the kind of voice that suggested she'd heard every excuse and believed none of them. "Miss Chen, we're investigating potential tax fraud related to trust distributions. I understand you have documentation suggesting fraudulent signatures?" I provided everything. The forged authorization forms, the trust tax returns, the correspondence with Aunt Patricia. Agent Walsh listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated she understood exactly what she was looking at. "Here's what happens next," she said when I'd finished. "We'll examine the tax returns filed by Jessica Morrison and Patricia Chen. If the trust distribution wasn't properly reported, or if there's evidence of conspiracy to evade taxes, we'll open a formal investigation. Given the amounts involved and the forgery, this could result in criminal charges. How long does that take? Depends on what we find. Could be weeks, could be months. In the meantime, maintain normal contact with your family. Don't mention this investigation. Let them think they got away with it." Her tone shifted slightly. "People who think they're clever tend to keep talking. That makes our job easier." I went back to my life, or tried to. Work provided a welcome distraction. My promotion to principal engineer came through, along with the salary increase and stock package my director had promised. I moved into a nicer apartment in Fremont, finally able to afford something more than a studio. My team launched another successful project, this one involving machine learning security applications. Meanwhile, Jessica's Instagram documented her perfect life. The kitchen renovation, which apparently cost $80,000. A new Lexus SUV for her birthday. Designer handbags that each cost more than my monthly student loan payment. Family vacation to Hawaii, first-class tickets and a beachfront resort. Brad's successful sales career apparently funded all of this, though simple math suggested his commissions couldn't possibly cover their lifestyle. Mom's phone calls always centered on Jessica's accomplishments. The kids were thriving in private school, which cost $35,000 per year per child. Jessica had hired a personal trainer and looked amazing, had I seen her recent photos. The house in Bellevue was now worth probably $900,000, wasn't that impressive? Each conversation was a carefully curated highlight reel of my sister's superiority. The truth was simpler and uglier. Jessica had stolen my inheritance and used it to build her perfect life while I paid off student loans and worked 60-hour weeks. Aunt Patricia had helped her commit fraud, forging my signature and lying about financial need. And Mom was so invested in Jessica's success that she'd probably known about it and approved. 6 months after my conversation with Agent Walsh, I received a text from an unknown number. "Investigation complete. Action imminent. Maintain normal behavior." The sender was listed only as VW. 2 days later, Mom called with unusual excitement. "Maya, Jessica's hosting a special family dinner Sunday night. Something about a big announcement. She insisted you be there. Can you make it?" "What's the announcement?" She wouldn't say, but she sounded so happy. "I think maybe they're buying investment property. Brad's been talking about real estate opportunities." Mom's voice practically bubbled with pride. "They're doing so well, Maya. Jessica has such a good head for finances." Sunday evening arrived cool and clear, typical Seattle weather transitioning into fall. I drove to Jessica's house in Bellevue, the one with the Italian marble countertops and professionally landscaped yard. Cars filled the driveway. Mom's Mercedes. Aunt Patricia's BMW. Brad's new Audi. The house glowed with warm light, and through the windows, I could see people moving around, setting up for something special. Jessica answered the door in a designer dress I recognized from her Instagram, her hair and makeup professionally done. "Maya. You made it." She hugged me with the enthusiasm of someone performing for an audience. Come in, come in. We're almost ready to start." The dining room looked like a magazine spread. Crystal glasses, fine china, flowers arranged in elaborate centerpieces. Mom sat at one end of the table, Aunt Patricia beside her, both dressed for an occasion. Brad stood near the head of the table, wearing a suit I'd never seen him in before. The kids were apparently with a sitter, leaving just the adults for this mysterious announcement. "Wine?" Jessica offered, gesturing to several open bottles that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "Just water, thanks." I took my assigned seat at the far end of the table, the position that clearly marked me as secondary to the evening's festivities. Jessica waited until everyone had drinks before standing, Brad rising beside her. She tapped her glass with a fork, the crystal ringing with a clear note. "Thank you all for coming tonight. Brad and I have something incredible to share. Something we've been working toward for years." She paused for effect, her smile radiant. "You all know about Dad's trust fund, the one he set up for Maya and me. My shoulders tensed. This was it. Whatever she was about to say would be my last memory before everything changed. Well, Jessica continued, her voice warm with pride, we used our portion wisely. Every single dollar was invested strategically. And I'm thrilled to announce that Brad and I just closed on our dream house, the one we've been wanting in Medina. 5 bedrooms, waterfront view, 3-car garage. We're moving up in the world. She gestured to the elaborate dinner spread. This celebration is funded by our smart financial planning. Dad would be so proud of how we honored his legacy. The room erupted in applause. Mom stood to hug Jessica, tears streaming down her face. Oh honey, that's wonderful. Medina. Do you know how exclusive that neighborhood is? Aunt Patricia beamed. Such smart planning. Such maturity. She shot me a quick glance. Some people save, others invest. You've invested brilliantly. Brad pulled out his phone, showing photos of their new house. It was massive, easily worth $2 million. Got a great deal. He boasted. Used Jessica's trust fund as the down payment, then leveraged my sales commissions for the mortgage. The bank loved our financials. I stayed silent, my phone vibrating steadily in my pocket. 5 texts in the past 2 minutes, all from unknown numbers. Jessica turned to me, her expression sympathetic in a way that made my jaw clench. Maya, I know you're still waiting for your portion. Dad set that age 35 rule for a reason. He knew you'd need more time to mature financially. But when you do get access, maybe Brad and I can give you investment advice? We've learned so much about wealth management. That's very generous, I replied evenly. I'm sure you've learned a lot about managing money that isn't yours. The comment hung in the air for a beat before Jessica laughed it off. See, this is why Dad worried about you. So focused on work that you miss the bigger picture. Family wealth is about growth, not about individual accounts. My phone buzzed again. This time I pulled it out, checking the screen. Agent Walsh's number. Excuse me, I need to take this. I stepped into Jessica's renovated kitchen, all Italian marble and stainless steel appliances, pressing the phone to my ear. Miss Chen, Agent Walsh's voice was crisp. We're proceeding now. Stay where you are. Team is 2 minutes out. Through the kitchen window, I saw 3 black SUVs turn onto Jessica's street, moving in formation. They parked in front of the house with military precision, doors opening to release agents in windbreakers marked with yellow letters. IRS, CI. I walked back to the dining room where Jessica was now explaining their financing strategy to Mom and Aunt Patricia. Brad was pulling out documents, showing off loan papers and investment statements. Nobody had noticed the vehicles outside. The doorbell rang. Jessica frowned, checking her watch. Who could that be? We're not expecting anyone. I'll get it, I offered, moving toward the door before anyone could object. Agent Victoria Walsh stood on the porch, flanked by 4 other agents. She held up her badge, the gold shield catching the porch light. Maya Chen? That's me. Is Jessica Morrison here? And Patricia Chen? In the dining room. All of them. She nodded, and the team moved past me with practiced efficiency, their footsteps heavy on Jessica's hardwood floors. I followed them back to the dining room, where the celebration was about to become something very different. The agents filed in, spreading out to block exits. Brad's wine glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the marble Jessica had bragged about for months. Jessica's face went white, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Aunt Patricia stood up so fast her chair tipped backward. Jessica Morrison? Agent Walsh's voice carried absolute authority. She held up her badge again. I'm Special Agent Victoria Walsh, IRS Criminal Investigation Division. You're under investigation for federal tax evasion, fraud, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. She turned to Aunt Patricia. Patricia Chen, you're also under investigation for conspiracy and abuse of fiduciary duty involving fraudulent trust distributions. Mom made us sound like a wounded animal. This is insane. There must be a mistake. No mistake, ma'am. Another agent, younger, but equally serious, pulled out a tablet. We have documentation showing Jessica Morrison received $250,000 from a trust fund in 2023 and failed to report it on her tax returns. We also have evidence that Patricia Chen, acting as trustee, forged beneficiaries' signatures to authorize illegal distributions. Brad tried to speak. We reported everything. Our accountant handled. Your accountant is also under investigation, Agent Walsh interrupted. He's currently being questioned at our field office about his role in helping you conceal taxable income. The documents you filed show home improvements, vehicle purchases, and private school tuition, but no corresponding income source beyond your salary, which doesn't support your expenses. Jessica found her voice finally, shrill and desperate. Maya, tell them this is crazy. We're family. Tell them. I met her gaze steadily. I can't tell them something that isn't true. You stole my inheritance, forged my signature, and used my money to fund your lifestyle. That's not crazy. That's fraud. You knew about this? Mom's voice cracked, her face crumpling. You knew and you let them come here? I knew you were all celebrating theft. I knew Dad's trust fund was meant for both his daughters equally. I knew someone forged my signature on legal documents. What I didn't know was whether you'd all be arrogant enough to throw a party with stolen money. I gestured to the elaborate dinner. Turns out you were. Agent Walsh's team began their work. Photographs of the documents Brad had been showing off, now evidence of fraudulent financing. Images of the dinner, the expensive wine, the celebration of criminal proceeds. One agent collected phones, ignoring Brad's protests about privacy. Another started reading Miranda rights to Jessica and Aunt Patricia. The IRS doesn't arrest people over mistakes, Agent Walsh said, her tone making it clear this wasn't a lecture but a statement of fact. We investigate criminal tax fraud. You received $250,000 and spent it on luxury items while reporting none of it. Your trustee helped you do it by forging documents and lying about financial need. And based on your spending patterns, you were planning to continue this fraud indefinitely. Jessica turned to Aunt Patricia, desperation replacing her earlier pride. You said it was fine. You said Maya made too much money anyway, that she didn't need it. Shut up, Jessica, Aunt Patricia hissed, but it was too late. So you acknowledged that financial need wasn't the real reason for early distribution? Agent Walsh's eyebrow raised. That's helpful. Please, continue. The next hour was a blur of procedure and documentation. Jessica and Aunt Patricia weren't arrested immediately. Instead, they were formally notified of the investigation and ordered to appear at the IRS field office within 48 hours. Brad, who'd apparently filed joint returns that failed to report the trust income, was also being investigated. Even Mom was questioned about whether she'd known about the trust distributions and failed to report gift taxes. I sat in Jessica's renovated kitchen, drinking water from her expensive glassware, while chaos erupted around me. Through the doorway, I could see Mom crying, Aunt Patricia on the phone with a lawyer who was clearly telling her things she didn't want to hear. Jessica pacing and hyperventilating while Brad tried to calm her down. Agent Walsh found me there 20 minutes later. You okay? I'm fine. We'll need you to come in tomorrow for a formal statement. Bring all your documentation. The forged signatures are particularly damaging. Our forensic document examiner confirmed they're fraudulent. She paused. Based on what we've found so far, this is going to result in criminal charges. The amount involved, the clear evidence of intent, the forgery. It's all there. What happens next? Investigation continues for a few more weeks, but we have enough for prosecution. Tax evasion alone carries significant penalties. Add in fraud and forgery, and we're looking at federal prison time, not just fines. She glanced toward the dining room where my family's perfect evening had collapsed. Your sister's new house? The one she just bought? IRS can seize assets purchased with unreported funds. Same with the cars, the luxury items, all of it. I thought about Jessica's Instagram, the carefully curated feed of perfection that was built on theft. Good. Agent Walsh almost smiled. The investigation has also revealed some interesting patterns. Your sister and her husband have been living significantly beyond their means for years. This isn't about one bad decision. It's systematic fraud that just happened to use your inheritance as the latest funding source. She left after getting my contact information for the follow-up interview. I sat alone in the kitchen for another 10 minutes before finally standing to leave. In the dining room, the celebration dinner sat untouched, food getting cold on expensive plates. Mom looked up as I walked past, her face aged 10 years in 2 hours. How could you do this to your sister? She whispered. I stopped, turning to face her fully. I didn't do anything to Jessica. She did it to herself. She stole from me, Mom. She forged my signature and took money that wasn't hers. And you're asking how I could do this to her? But family. Family doesn't commit fraud. Family doesn't steal. And family doesn't celebrate theft while the victim sits at the table watching. I pulled out my phone, showing her a photo I'd saved. This is Dad and me at my Microsoft promotion ceremony. You weren't there because you were at Jessica's kindergarten play for her youngest. I'd just been promoted to senior engineer with a salary that exceeded Dad's pension, and you chose a preschool event over recognizing my achievement. Mom's face crumpled further, but I continued. For 34 years, I've been the smart one who didn't need attention. Jessica was the pretty one who deserved celebration. Well, I'm still the smart one, Mom. Smart enough to recognize theft. Smart enough to document fraud. And smart enough to let the federal government handle it instead of being silenced by family loyalty that only ever went one direction. I left through the front door, passing Agent Walsh's team as they loaded evidence into their vehicles. My car sat at the curb, unremarkable and paid off, unlike the luxury vehicles in Jessica's driveway that were about to be seized. I drove back to Seattle as the sun set over Puget Sound, my phone silent for the first time in hours. The investigation took 4 more months, during which I provided testimony, submitted documentation, and watched from a distance as my sister's perfect life unraveled. The IRS forensic accounting team discovered that Brad's sales commissions had been significantly overstated on loan applications. The mortgage for the Medina house was fraudulent, based on false income claims. Their accountant had helped them hide income and overstate deductions for years. Jessica and Brad were charged with tax evasion, mortgage fraud, and conspiracy. Aunt Patricia faced charges for fraud and abuse of fiduciary duty. The prosecution laid out a timeline that showed systematic deception. Aunt Patricia had authorized Jessica's early trust distribution based on false claims of financial need, helped her forge my signature on authorization documents, then worked with Jessica's accountant to structure the funds in a way that avoided proper tax reporting. The houses, both the Bellevue property and the new Medina purchase, were seized by the IRS. The luxury vehicles, gone. The private school tuition payments, now evidence of criminal proceeds. Jessica's perfect Instagram feed went dark after federal agents photographed her kitchen as evidence of unreported income spent on luxury items. The trial lasted 2 weeks. I sat in the courtroom gallery, watching as prosecutors presented the evidence I'd helped them gather. The forged signatures, blown up on screens for the jury to see. The trust documents showing equal distribution requirements. The tax returns that omitted $250,000 in income. The spending records that showed systematic luxury purchases inconsistent with reported income. Jessica's defense attorney tried to paint her as a naive mother who'd relied on her aunt's financial advice. The prosecution destroyed that narrative by showing her Instagram posts celebrating her smart investments and financial acumen. They showed emails between Jessica and Aunt Patricia discussing how to structure the trust distribution to avoid scrutiny. They showed text messages where Jessica bragged to friends about finally getting my fair share of Dad's money. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Judge Raymond Torres presided over sentencing 3 weeks later. He reviewed the evidence with obvious distaste, occasionally shaking his head as he read through the financial records. When he finally looked up, his expression was severe. "Miss Morrison, you committed fraud against your own sister. You enlisted your aunt's help to forge documents and steal money that wasn't yours. You then failed to report this income, evading over $60,000 in federal taxes. You used the stolen funds to purchase luxury items and misrepresent your financial status to obtain additional fraudulent loans." He paused. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was calculated, systematic theft from a family member who'd done nothing to deserve such treatment. Jessica's sentence came down like a hammer. 3 years in federal prison, no early release, plus full restitution of $250,000 to me, $68,000 to the IRS for evaded taxes, and penalties totaling another $150,000. Brad received 2 years for his role in the mortgage fraud and tax evasion. Aunt Patricia stood before the judge next, her attorney arguing she was simply trying to help her niece. The prosecution's rebuttal was devastating. She'd violated her fiduciary duty as trustee, forged beneficiary signatures, and participated in conspiracy to defraud. Her sentence: 18 months in federal prison and permanent removal from serving as trustee for any entity, plus restitution payments and penalties. Mom, who'd been investigated but not charged, was required to pay gift taxes on money Jessica had given her over the years, money that came from the fraudulent trust distribution. Her tax bill came to $48,000, wiping out a significant portion of her retirement savings. The house in Bellevue sold at auction, purchased by a tech executive relocating from California. Jessica and Brad's possessions, the designer furniture, and expensive electronics, and luxury items that had filled their Instagram feed, were sold to satisfy their restitution obligations. The Medina house never officially became theirs. The sale was voided due to mortgage fraud, leaving them with nothing but legal fees and criminal records. I sat in my apartment in Fremont the evening after the sentencing, drinking coffee and watching the city lights reflect off Lake Union. My phone showed multiple missed calls from Mom, but I wasn't ready to engage with her desperate attempts to rebuild a relationship she'd never properly valued. The trust fund money, my rightful $250,000 plus interest accumulated during Jessica's theft, had been transferred to my account 2 weeks earlier. Combined with my Microsoft stock options and my salary as a principal engineer, I was looking at a net worth that exceeded anything Dad had probably imagined for either of his daughters. I thought about what Jessica had said at that dinner, about Dad setting the age 35 rule because he thought I needed time to mature. The truth was simpler. Dad had wanted both his daughters to have equal opportunities at the same age. Jessica's manipulations had circumvented his wishes, but federal law enforcement had corrected it. My promotion to distinguished engineer came through 3 months after the trial concluded. The title was rare, reserved for fewer than 1% of Microsoft's technical staff. My work on security infrastructure had become required reading for new hires. The machine learning systems my team developed were being deployed globally. My salary now exceeded $400,000 annually, with stock options that vested at rates that made my financial advisor excited. I used a portion of the trust fund money to establish a scholarship at University of Washington for women studying computer science. The Maya and James Chen Memorial Scholarship, honoring Dad's memory and support. The first recipient was a first-generation immigrant student whose profile reminded me of my own journey. Brilliant, overlooked, and determined. The rest of the money I invested, carefully and methodically, working with a financial advisor who understood my risk tolerance and long-term goals. Within a year, the portfolio had grown by 15%. I bought a condo in Fremont with a view of the water, small but mine, paid for with money that I'd earned and inherited legitimately. Jessica's letters from federal prison started arriving 6 months into her sentence. The first was angry, blaming me for ruining her life, for not understanding family loyalty, for being petty enough to involve authorities. The second came 2 months later, shifting to self-pity. Prison was hard, the other inmates were scary, she missed her kids. Couldn't I find it in my heart to forgive her? By the third letter, hints of actual understanding started appearing. Not quite remorse, but recognition. I keep thinking about Dad, she wrote, about how disappointed he'd be. Not just in what I did, but in why I did it. I told myself you didn't need the money as much, that you were already successful. But the truth was I wanted everything you had and everything I had too. I wanted to be both the pretty one and the successful one. And I was willing to steal from you to make it happen. She never apologized, never acknowledged the specific pain of watching her celebrate theft while I sat silent. But she stopped writing eventually, perhaps finally understanding that her words, like her presence, were no longer relevant to my life. Mom's attempts at reconciliation were more persistent. Phone calls, emails, cards on holidays. Each message carried variations of the same theme. Family should forgive. Everyone makes mistakes. Couldn't I find it in my heart to move past this? She never acknowledged her role in creating the dynamic where Jessica's needs always trumped mine. She never apologized for missing my achievements while celebrating Jessica's every minor milestone. The breaking point came on what would have been Dad's 70th birthday. Mom called, crying, saying how much Dad would want us all together. He'd want his family united, she sobbed. Dad wanted his daughters to be treated equally, I replied. He set up a trust fund with explicit terms. Jessica violated those terms, you supported her, and Aunt Patricia enabled it all. Dad would be proud of me for standing up for myself. He'd be ashamed of all of you. I hung up and blocked her number. Not out of anger, but out of recognition that some relationships cause more harm than good. The fantasy of a loving family where my achievements mattered as much as Jessica's performance had never been real. Holding on to it would only hurt me further. A year after the trial, I received an email from Lawrence Mitchell, Dad's former attorney. He'd heard about the case and wanted to share something he'd kept private out of professional obligation to his client. "Your father knew," he wrote, "that the family dynamics were unfair to you. He structured the trust specifically to ensure you'd both receive equal treatment after he was gone. He told me once that he worried Jessica would always be the favorite in your mother's eyes, but he wanted to make sure you knew you were equally valuable to him. I think he'd be proud of how you handled this." I printed that email and put it in a frame on my desk, next to the photo of Dad and me at my college graduation. Proof that at least one person had seen my worth, even if he hadn't been able to change the family dynamics while he was alive. 2 years after the trial, my life looked nothing like the invisible existence I'd endured before. My career had accelerated beyond anything I'd imagined. I was speaking at conferences, publishing papers on security architecture, mentoring junior engineers. My name appeared in technical journals and industry publications. The work I did protected millions of users from sophisticated cyber threats. The condo I'd bought appreciated significantly as Seattle's tech boom continued. My investment portfolio had grown beyond the original trust fund amount. The scholarship I'd established had expanded to support 3 students annually. I was building something that mattered, just like Dad had always said I would. Jessica was released from prison after serving 27 months, her sentence slightly reduced for good behavior. Her Instagram account, which had been her primary source of validation, remained dark. Brad had been released 6 months earlier and immediately filed for divorce. She moved back in with Mom, working at a retail job to pay off her remaining restitution obligations. I learned this through mutual acquaintances, not through direct contact. The distance between us was now measured in more than miles. It was measured in choices, in consequences, in fundamental differences in how we valued integrity versus image. On the 3rd anniversary of Dad's death, I drove to the cemetery alone. His grave was simple, just a stone with his name and dates. No elaborate epitaph, nothing flashy. It suited him perfectly. I sat on the grass beside it, drinking coffee from a thermos and telling him about my latest project at work. About the scholarship recipients who'd sent me thank you notes. About the condo with its water view. "Jessica stole my money," I said finally, "but she couldn't steal what you gave me that mattered. She couldn't steal my education, my skills, my integrity. She couldn't steal the knowledge that at least one person saw my worth. She tried to erase me, Dad, just like the family had been doing my whole life. But I didn't let her." The October wind rustled through the trees overhead, carrying the smell of rain and fallen leaves. In the distance, I could see Puget Sound, gray and vast under cloudy skies. The city where I'd built my life, on my own terms, with money I'd earned and inherited legitimately. My phone buzzed with a notification. My team had just pushed a major security update live, protecting another 1 million users from potential threats. The kind of achievement that wouldn't make it into family conversations, but would make a real difference in people's lives. I stood up, brushing grass off my jeans, preparing to drive back to my life. The one where I was valued, respected, and successful. Where my achievements weren't footnotes to someone else's performance. Where silence wasn't weakness but strategy. Before I left, I pulled out my phone and opened the voice memo app. "Dad," I said into it, recording my thoughts for the 3rd year running. "You wanted equal treatment for both your daughters. Jessica chose to steal instead of wait. But your trust in me, in my integrity, in my ability to stand up for myself, that paid off in ways the money never could. I hope you're proud." I saved the recording, adding it to the collection I'd been building. Proof that I remembered, that his faith in me hadn't been misplaced, that the smart one had turned out to be the successful one after all. If this story of silent strength and federal justice resonated with you, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was Maya's calm during the family dinner, knowing exactly what was about to happen. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.